Hello everyone, Matt from Model Minutes here. I was recently sent some review samples from the Ukrainian company SPALAH. This company manufactures 3D printed figures and diorama accessories, and they've sent over a few bits and pieces for me to have a look at. Whilst I have received these things free of charge for the purpose of review, all opinions do remain my own. Not only have they sent some of their military figures, they've also sent one of their monsters from the S.T.A.L.K.E.R video game series. A nice little bonus that was inside the box were some postage stamps. A nice little addition which I'm sure I will keep safe somewhere. They also sent over a military patch which I'm told was donated by a family member of the company who is currently serving in the Ukrainian forces. Firstly, I need to get inside all the boxes. Everything comes rather securely packaged and even features a painting instruction sheet based on the product that you've purchased. For the more delicate figures, they come printed in little cages, with the support material still attached. So the first step was to carefully cut away all the support material to release the figures from their little cages. I did have to be super careful whilst doing this because in a few places the details are rather fragile and you do run the risk of breaking them, and there were a few points where I did have to super glue them back on. Some figures do actually come in a number of parts, probably to make printing easier, so these were glued together with a little super glue. I was also sent a few extra bits and pieces, such as this generator which had to be glued together, and this rocket launcher which comes in a number of parts. It was a little bit fragile, so I had to take care when handling it, but it glued together with the minimum of fuss. With all of the 3D printed figures and accessories now released from their cages and tidied up, it was time to prime. I'm going to be using this gloss black as my base colour for all the figures and accessories. A couple of thin coats was sprayed onto everything. I then removed a couple of bits and pieces that I wanted to stay in this black finish, and then went over the top with a white spray paint to add a zenithal highlight. This should catch on the raised areas as if the sun is shining down on the figures. Now it's time to start painting the figures. During this project I'm going to be using a variety of contrast paints and also standard acrylics which I thinned down. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this process as I have covered it in a little more depth in a standalone figure painting video. I think though for the monster it is worth pointing out that I used two main colours and actually blended them whilst they were wet on the figure to try and get a nice gradient between the shades. For the rest of the figures though, it was a relatively straightforward process using a relatively fine brush to try and pick out all the relevant details that I wanted in different colours. I used a variety of browns and greens to try and pick out their clothing, equipment and other bits and pieces. That zenithal highlight that I've applied should help shine through and make the upper surfaces of the figure a little more vibrant and add some contrast and shade. I didn't want all the figures to look exactly the same, so I varied which parts I painted in the different colours, so they all look a little bit different. Painting these figures was a little bit fiddly in places given the amount of detail that they hold, but I found with some care and patience I got to the point where I was happy with these ones. The diorama accessories such as the weapon and the other bits and pieces were suitably painted as well. For some of them though I didn't go too adventurous with the painting and would only apply a little dry brushing with a light grey to bring out the raised details. And that's the point where I'm pretty happy with all of my 3D printed parts, but I need something to display them on. So I've been out and purchased this 3D printed display base from 3D Gizmo. I think this should complement the figures from SPALAH. This diorama base does come with some accessories as well, which I had to assemble and super glue on. You do get a lamp, which I think you might be able to actually install an LED inside of, as the lamp post is hollow, but I didn't bother in this build. I glued on the lamppost and then the bollards in places which I thought looked about right. There are some window frames as well, and these were glued into place looking rather damaged. I've also got this bag of diorama scatter bits, which includes extra bits and pieces like oil drums, a door, and some bricks and pieces. I decided to superglue these onto the diorama base in a kind of position that looked like perhaps my figures have had some sort of outpost or defensive position where they were using their rocket launcher. Some extra scatter materials would be glued in different places to further enhance the diorama base. And now it's time to prime. Again, I'm going to be using this filler primer, which, as this base is 3D printed, you can see in a few places some layer lines, so this should help hide that and fill them in a little bit. A few thin coats of this would be used, and then I would use the black rattle can from earlier on the edges and the rear of the diorama, as well as in a few other places to try and add a little bit of contrast and shade for when I do the painting in a minute. And speaking of the painting, this was a bit of a trial and error kind of process. First off, I started painting the walls of the damaged building using a pale sand colour. A couple of thin coats would be needed to get a good level of opacity. I painted the groundwork of the diorama base using a medium grey colour. This would be painted over the entire base area, but I will add further colours shortly to make this look a little bit more realistic. I mixed up a reddy brown colour which would be used on the exposed bricks on the walls of the building. When that was done, I would carefully use this on all of the bricks which have been cast from the building when the building became damaged. To add a little bit of colour, I decided to paint the window frames and the shutters in a blue. And the door that these figures are using as a makeshift defensive position was painted with a kind of wood stain brown colour. I would mix up a variety of different shades of browns and dark kind of greens and use this to pick out various stones in different places on the base as well to add some visual interest. The bollards and the lamppost would be painted with a dark grey. And now it's time to make things a little bit dirtier. I'm going to be using this rust paint from Dirty Down on all of the oil drums and in different places to help give the impression that these things have been exposed to the elements for a long period of time and they have started to corrode. I would also repeat the process using some Dirty Down moss. This would be painted onto various areas of the diorama where I think perhaps some moss may have started to grow. And this should add some further visual interest to the diorama. When that was done, I used this dark grey enamel paint as a wash. So I thinned it down with some white spirit until it was quite thin. And then this was applied over the entire diorama base. This should run into all of those recessed details and help add some more contrast, as well as sort of simulating a level of dirt and grime. I would only apply one thin coat of this, and it would be allowed to run into all of the recessed areas of the diorama. When that was complete and now dry, I'd actually been online and found some reasonably suitable graffiti images which I thought might be good for applying on the walls of the building. They were downloaded and printed out onto some decal paper and then applied in random places to add a further level of detail to this diorama. When these were applied, I would go over the top of them with a little gloss varnish to help stick them down onto the surface. With everything now dry, I went over the entire model with a light grey. This was done using the dry brushing technique, so there isn't actually any real paint on the paintbrush, just the residue. This should catch on all of the raised details and highlight them, adding a little bit more of a three-dimensional effect. The final bit of weathering that I want to do is making things look a little bit dirtier in places. So I mixed up a very thin black paint using black paint, a little touch of brown and a clear matte varnish. This was then passed through the airbrush and carefully applied to the various areas of the diorama where I thought perhaps more dirt and grime and shade may exist. This should add a further level of depth to the diorama, as well as starting to blend everything together. On the building, I wanted to pay a little bit of attention around the windows to make it look as though it perhaps had been on fire at some point, and smoke had escaped from the windows. With that done, I decided to glue into place all of the accessories from SPALAH as well as the figures. I had already kind of planned out where I wanted things to go, so this step was pretty quick to complete. A little bit of super glue would be used to hold all of these accessories in place, but I had to be super careful with some of them, such as the drone, because they are very fragile. The final step was to add the figures in positions which perhaps would look a little bit realistic, as though they are either ambushing a monster or perhaps have been caught off guard and are reacting to the monster being in their area. When I was putting the figures in place, I tried to make use of the different levels of the diorama to make sure that there was something happening at each level. And with the figures in place, the final one to install was the monster itself. And with that, I'm going to call this build complete. And that's another build under the belt, or in this case a diorama on the desktop. Either way, I'm pretty happy with how this one looks. I don't generally do particularly large dioramas, and this is probably the largest one I've done recently. But it was really a whole lot of fun. It's been a good experience to try out some weathering and painting on subjects that I don't normally cover. I think it only fair though that I sum up this with a review. Firstly, I just want to talk about the 3D Gizmo diorama base, which I believe is a FDM printed product. Whilst FDM printing isn't quite as refined as SLA, I still think that this was printed to a good quality. There are a few little imperfections in places, but something that could definitely be overcome by the modeler. The benefit of this kind of base is that it gives you a ready-made diorama which you just need to upgrade yourself. So in my opinion, I think that these kinds of products are a great way for a beginner to be able to produce something quite quickly with good results. Swinging back to the 3D printed products I received from SPALAH, I was actually really impressed with the level of detail that they contain. Perhaps the level of detail is so high that in places, some of the parts are a little fragile. In particular, the fine parts such as the straps on the rucksacks and the barrels on the weapons do run the risk of being damaged, especially when you're handling them. But the resin can be easily glued back together using some super glue. I have genuinely been quite impressed with these products and may consider seeking more from this company in the future. They do seem to have quite a good variety on their website at the moment. And with that, I think I'm going to wrap this one up here. I had quite a bit of fun completing this project, and it certainly makes a change from my normal subjects. But let me know what do you think of my build down in the comments below, and if you have any suggestions for any future builds. I'd like to extend my gratitude for the samples that were received free of charge for the purpose of this video. As always, a quick shout out to my Model Club members for the extra support they give the channel. Massive thanks to these guys on screen, and if you'd like to join them or support the channel in other ways, check out the links in the description. The best way to support the channel for free though is by subscribing with notifications turned on so you never miss a modelling upload. Last thing to say though is a massive thank you to you for watching this one, and I'll see you on the workbench again next time.